All right, Emilia Ziozzi, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's take a step back there and talk about the coca cultivation. You said there that coca in and of itself is not illegal. Has it become illegal in certain places? And the farmers who are cultivating the coca, walk me through what goes into that typically. Granted, again, there is going to be differences between countries and different regions and different countries, but talk to me from the farmer's perspective a little bit about what's going on when they're coca farmers, if there's coercion to be farmers like that, if it's a coveted thing that many farmers want to do, and again, if that is actually legal or illegal in different regions.
Yeah. So I think in terms of how the process works varies a lot. Also in terms of country and region. For example, in Colombia, usually you have farmers that work on the growing process and on the harvesting process, but usually the areas where this harvest happens are heavily controlled by armed groups. And what I mean when I say control, it can mean many things, usually, for example, armed groups can sort of tax them to sort of use the land where the plants are grown, or what can also happen is that they sort of set up prices for then, for example, coca paste, or also they decide, right, who can then buy the coca paste, they also provide, for example, protection to the areas where coca plants are grown. However, in other places, such as, for example, Bolivia, I think that there was an article that came out a few years ago, which talked specifically about the fact that we have this sort of idea of especially the harvesting and the production of cocaine as inherently violent, while this article talked about Bolivia. And it was sort of mentioning how in Bolivia things work a bit differently than in Colombia, because campesinos, so farmers, and the unions have sort of a little bit more freedom when it comes to actually, harvesting, and then there is less violence connected to the production. So I guess that goes to reiterate once more the extent to which there is huge variations, right, in how the production processes happen, also in the levels of violence that surround the production and the next steps. But yeah, generally I would say the first part of the production is the one that sort of requires a little bit less skills when it comes to really technical skills from, let's say, the farmers. There's a lot of people that work on it, and then also collect the leaves, and that is very much the first step of it.
And in general, granted, again, I'll stop qualifying it. It varies in each area. When you think of these farmers, are you thinking of them as people who are coerced into doing this by the groups that run this? Or are you thinking of a lot of the farmers as people who they're choosing to do this, understanding what the coca leaves are going to be used for once they're cultivated? And for many of them, they look at this as this is an opportunity that they actually actively want to do because it's worth it for them. Again, huge variations, but how do you view the farmer, and what's the reality on the ground in terms of the mindset of the average farmer, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's hard to say. I think in probably many of the cases they are indeed coerced. Let's say when farmers live in areas where coca is harvested, usually these are very remote areas, and so obviously there is usually less presence of the state, and so armed groups are the ones sort of in charge. But it's not just coercion as we think about it, so from armed groups in that sense, but it is also in terms of sometimes there is not much more that you can do in certain regions, right, that are very remote and that don't have a lot of infrastructure. And so what happens is that actually that's one economy that is stable and that actually pays them, and in a way that is the only way in which certain people can actually then make a living, right? So I think it's probably a mixture of the two. I'm pretty sure, I mean, that in most cases, if there was a viable alternatives, then probably farmers would choose also to grow something else. But it is true that coca plants are, in terms of, for example, profitability, it is, let's say, much more profitable to grow coca plants than, for example, coffee. And usually prices are a bit more stable as well. Though I think in the last years there has been an overproduction, for example, in Colombia when it comes to coca, and so prices have gone down. But generally, you always have a buyer for coca, and usually prices are a bit more stable. Also, the plants. I mean, these are, I think, plants that can be sort of harvested probably, I think, 3 to 5 times a year. And so that's actually pretty good, I think. For coffee, it's something like probably 1 or 2 times a year. So that also counts, right?
And you might have mentioned this before, but we talked a little bit about legality or illegality, and you said that it's the coca leaf itself, cultivating that is not illegal. Is that still the case in most of these places, or in a lot of these places is it kind of understood, well, no, it's illegal now because we know why you are cultivating the coca leaf?
I should probably look it up, but I mean, whether in all of these places is legal, I know that it is legal, for example, in Colombia and Bolivia, especially because it's also used as, for example, as I would say it's consumed in tea, or it's chewed, right? Also for indigenous communities. So, to be honest,
So those
yeah.
things, yeah, so that explains it. So those things that you mentioned earlier, tea, for example, that's not just something that is used as kind of an excuse. That's a reality that people do use it, and that there is a market for that too.
Exactly, yeah. It's literally like coca leaves put in, in hot water. And also, I don't know if you've ever traveled, for example, to Colombia, but then again, when sometimes when you go climb a mountain, you are also given, by local population, you can buy sort of coca leaves just to chew, because that is just helps with altitude.
For the altitude.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I probably could have used some of that when I was in Bolivia and had some really bad altitude sickness. In fact, I think they offered it to me, and I just wasn't really sure about what it was, because you just associated with cocaine. So I said no, but I was vomiting about an hour later. So maybe I should have taken that. Let's talk about after the farmers. You mentioned the processing into cocaine paste, as well as the refinement process, and this takes place in small labs and in large labs. Give me a bit of a sense of where that's happening and who's controlling that and what that process looks like.
Yeah. So after, let's say, the planting and then the harvesting and the drying or the coca leaves, then, and the collection obviously of them, then it is processed in coca paste, and this usually happens in sort of small workshops, I would say, that are located obviously close to the coca fields. And I think the first steps are usually fairly as well easy. They don't require like too many technical skills, and there's some chemistry involved still, because obviously there's some acids that go into it. I think then the shredded coca leaves are sort of mixed also with gasoline, with certain acids, and then what happens is that it gets turned into what it is called the coca paste, let's say. And then from there, usually, and this is usually again, as it happens sort of very close to the coca fields, usually there's still armed groups there. And then, especially, I'm referring to Colombia mostly here, because probably that's the one where I know the more about. It heavily depends on regions. So again, within Colombia, you have different armed groups that sort of control differently the production of it, right? So again, there's variation into that, but I would say generally they are more involved into this part of the process, and often also set the prices you know, how much to sell the coca paste for, and they decide who to sell it to. So farmers don't really get that much of a say in that. And then after that, what happens is that the coca paste is usually sold and then refined, and that is sort of a little bit of more of a complex stage of processing, let's say. It requires more skills, it requires a bit more equipment, a bit more chemicals, so it's also more costly, right? And it is a bit more harder to obtain. And usually this happens in labs that are a bit more that are larger, and that are more controlled by armed groups, because there's a lot of secrecy around it. They need to be heavily secured, because it is also sort of the final product, so the product that costs more, right? And that can happen actually. So I think that's an interesting element about production. It can either happen in Colombia, or we've seen, for example, recently that these sort of coca labs have been found also in Central America, so for the last stages of the refinement, or sometimes in Mexico. I think I was reading recently about a case also in the Netherlands, but I think that is still quite, I mean, it doesn't happen that often. It was probably one case. But I mean, definitely there could be changes in the future in terms of, the last stages of production where they happen, because also it's where, sort of most of the risk goes into, right? So the cost goes up at that stage.